Hey, what's up, Unbroken Nation? Hope that you're doing well wherever you are in the world today. Very excited to be back with you with another episode with my guest, Dr. Kelli Palfy, who is the author of Men to Unspoken Truths about Male Sexual Abuse. Kelli, my friend, I'm very excited to have you on the show today. How are you?
Thanks, Michael. I'm well and I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. And I know that this is a subject that we're going to create a lot of context around. And for those folks who don't know you, can you tell us a little bit about you and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. I'm a registered psychologist. I work in private practice in the Edmonton, Alberta area. But prior to becoming a psychologist, I was a police lady, and so that's sort of what gave me the background to do this type of work with male survivors of sexual abuse. And I'm happy to explain that to you if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to know kind of what sparked this interest for you to go and create, not only and write this book, but to be of service in this area. And I'll preface the conversation with this. When I was young, I was molested by a member of our church, and it was
Right.
something that was told to be pushed down, don't talk about it, pretend it didn't happen, because in context, my mother was trying to make sure that people in the church could take care of us, and she didn't want to, for lack of a better term, rock the boat, excuse
Yeah,
me.
absolutely.
And
So
that's
common.
yeah, very common, right? And it sent me
Mhm.
down this incredible confusion around sexuality, around who I am
Mhm.
as a person, my identity, so on
Yeah.
and so forth. And it really wasn't until I got deep into the work that
Mhm.
things started to change. And I'll tell you this as context to this conversation, I really haven't dove into this in depth on the show, and so I'm very excited to have you on
Mhm.
to talk
Yeah.
about this. So I'd love if
Well,
you give us a little bit of background and understanding about male sexual abuse in general.
absolutely. And Michael, we're going to have to make this a two-part series probably because there's so much we could talk about. But yeah, so I was a RCMP officer. I was working in the behavioral sciences unit, specifically in the Integrated Child Sexual Exploitation Unit. So they were training me to be a subject matter expert. And to be honest, we had seized all these videotapes. We were investigating the RCMP's first, we call it sex tourism file, which means a Canadian had traveled abroad for the purposes of exploiting a child sexually. We'd seized all this material. We were going through all of the videos of what had taken place, unfortunately, and we were seeing male sexual abuse happening there. But to be honest, I didn't recognize it as abuse because, of course, the boys looked like they were having fun, and I didn't really think too much about it. But then, that was one crime scene or whatever that we were investigating, one crime, one set of crimes. But then we got more and more and more files, and I started to see more of this. And on a training seminar, when they were trying to like training me to be a subject matter expert, they had Sheldon Kennedy come in and talk to us. Now he was sexually abused by his coach. He's a former pro hockey player. He played for the Chicago Blackhawks, Calgary Flames, Detroit Red Wings, a few teams like that. And he started being abused by his first coach, and he talked to us about all the reasons why he didn't talk about it. So, he had his reasons were so valid. I mean, he said he was raised in poverty, and his newfound career was literally lifting his family out of poverty. His whole community was super proud of him. His parents were super proud of him. He knew he had the skill set to go pro, and he knew that his coach could get him there. So, those are the reasons that he stayed quiet. But he said he also stayed quiet because he felt like some of his teammates' parents knew that he was being abused and did nothing. So he felt like nobody would help. And this was early 2000s, right? So prior to becoming a police lady, I had worked in corrections. And I remember when I was working in corrections wondering, why are there so many men and women, compared to women? And I never got that answer. I never understood it. But when Sheldon Kennedy started talking about the ways he coped with his abuse, which was, like on the ice, he'd take it out in aggression and, turning to drugs and alcohol, it was like the lights started to go on for me. I started to see, holy crap, is this why there's maybe why there might be more men in prison than, say, women? Because we've got a plethora of boys who were abused that had no supports, and continually being their abuse being minimized or being told that they shouldn't have been abused or they weren't abused, and having to turn to alcohol and drugs to numb themselves rather than how a woman might be fully supported in society. So at the time, I just remember like my heart just bled for him, and I remember thinking like we have to do something, like we need to do more. But of course, I'm working full time investigating child sex crimes, and I just remember, my heart bled for him, and just I was just so aware that there were no resources for men. Ironically, at the time, he also talked about living a double life. He said, on one hand, I was a pro hockey player, but on the other hand, I was being abused. And that's the small piece that I kind of related to, because I was going through pretty significant bullying and I didn't know how to stop it. And it was like destroying me. And I mean, I was an adult, I was a police lady with a badge and a gun. He was a youth, like away from home for the first time with like, his entire future career on the line. So I was just very, very aware of how society fails boys and men. So then fast forward a few years, I actually ended up losing my career in policing to bullying, and I was absolutely desperate to find something else to be passionate about. And I'm very grateful that one of my professors in my master's program, I had already started my master's degree before I left the RCMP, I just decided to stay in school. And one of my professors mentioned that he worked at a place called the BC Society for Male Survivors of Sexual Abuse. And I mean, you have to understand, I was clinically depressed at that time. And when he said that, it was like, hey, I could get on board for that. Like, I know I've witnessed this. Like, I was trained in this area. Like, I understand some of the problems that boys and men have, or at least a few of them. And the biggest thing was that I had missed it initially, like I said, I didn't know what I was seeing initially. And there was a huge conviction in that for me. So it was like, if I'm supposed to be the expert in this area and I don't even know this, what does the rest of the population know, right? Like less than I do. So I just decided to make it my goal when I pursued my doctoral research to examine like other reasons why boys and men might not be coming forward. So yeah, so that's how I got involved in this. And then I got really, really good reviews on my dissertation and ended up turning it into a book so that it could be accessible for, as a support for male survivors, and then also like as sort of a tool to help other people in the world understand, the reasons that boys and men don't come forward, the complicated barriers that they face compared to women.
Yeah, and I would love to start there and
Mhm.
ask you, why is it that there's so much confusion for male survivors, and why do they not come forward?
There are a lot of reasons. A lot of them have to do with society, right? Like, masculine biases that say boys and men are not supposed to be victims, and that old myths that we used to believe, boys and men always want sex, they never turn it down, they can control their erection, stuff like this. So of course, if you've got a boy that's been abused and he was not able to control his erection, or ended up enjoying it, he's obviously going to be very confused about his own willingness to participate. So even though he may have been coerced, threatened, shamed into engaging in these sexual acts, his body may have responded. So that's very confusing for a boy or for a man. And of course, offenders in their grooming process will um, throw that sort of back at the victim and say, "Oh, look, you like this, we're friends, this is a healthy relationship, we're in love," kind of thing. And they get confused about their own willingness in that abuse, their own participation, their own degree of willingness. So I mean, that's one reason. There's a lot of reasons, or that's a couple reasons. There are a lot of reasons. Like I mentioned with Sheldon Kennedy, one of the biggest reasons was they felt like nobody would care, nobody was going to help them, even if they did disclose. So that's like terrible, right? I mean, and again, that's perpetuated by society. I mean, it's still not uncommon to hear male rape jokes on popular TV, right? Like, blows my mind to this day that that's allowed, but you know. So things like that. A lot of it is fear too. I mean, oftentimes the offenders will threaten their victims. So, a victim that's been threatened is a lot more likely to stay quiet. Many times they're victimized by someone in their biological family, so someone that they might be dependent on, a bio parent even, which is really sad. But a couple of my participants in my research said that they never disclosed their abuse because if they did, they would never have a chance of going to university. So calculated decision to not say something. Oftentimes there's a fear that if I do say something about dad or stepdad or uncle or whatever, what's going to happen to the family, right? They protect their parents, they protect their siblings. They'll say, I'll take the abuse so my sister doesn't have to, that kind of thing. It's just like boys, even at that age, doing what boys and men are conditioned to do, protecting other people from information that they think would be too hard for them to handle or too hard for the family to manage. Or like you mentioned in your case, Michael, like your mother didn't want to rock the boat, right? Like a lot of the boys abused at church often don't want to blow their parents' church apart by this information, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting to me because you mentioned that a lot of times it's somebody in the family, but it's
Mhm.
also, and I think that perhaps this isn't discussed enough,
Yeah.
and maybe it's just the way that we look at society. But there's also females who abuse boys
Oh yeah.
and girls as well. Why do you feel like that is, and how do we kind of bring more awareness to it from all aspects and all scopes of the conversation?
I mean, why do I think that is? I think the females would abuse a child for the same reasons, possibly for the same reasons. Actually, I mean, that's not my area of specialty, honestly, but um, like why they would abuse a child. But I know that it happens. It's very common, and the way society responds to that is shocking. I mean, if a female abuses a male, I mean, I know that it's changing, but not fast enough. They will often treat it as if it's a coming of age thing. Sorry, my puppy. or like a rite of passage kind of thing, right? So yeah, but that just doesn't happen when it's a female victim, right? Misty
Yeah.
sit.
And that's one of the things that I've always kind of been perplexed by, because I'm on a different side of the coin really than a lot of people who've gone through those experiences. One of the things that you talked about was this idea of grooming. And I
Yeah.
know that, so for context, a lot of people listening, I would call the majority of listeners of this show, they have children, or they're in the process, they have kids, they have
Mhm.
teens. Can you talk about the
Yeah,
tactics of grooming and what
absolutely.
people can be on the lookout for?
Yeah, so grooming techniques, one of the things that parents really need to be aware of is that offenders will typically work really, really, really hard to come across as the least likely person you would ever suspect. So it's not, a stranger danger used to be the thing that we warned kids about. Unfortunately, over 90% of abuse is happening by someone that the child knows and loves, and also someone that the parent trusts. So typically, offenders will try to meet the needs of the parent and the child. So let's say the parent wants to, allow little Johnny to go off to soccer camp, but they can't because it's on a day where they work. Oh, I can take Johnny. I will make myself available. That kind of thing. And they will pay special attention, maybe offer to coach little Johnny extra. They will, oftentimes their friendship is maintained for a very long time before sexual abuse begins happening. But there is usually a kind of deliberate, premeditated process that they will go through. So it's going to start with just like, visits with the family involved. And then once they've won the affection and trust of the parents, they'll start to be alone with the child, or maybe alone with the child and one or two of his friends. They'll get them engaged in, say, rough play, that kind of thing, and they'll encourage masculine principles, right? Like whether they're wrestling or swearing or whatever it is they have them doing, they'll reward them for these behaviors. They'll somehow introduce secrecy into the process. So perhaps by allowing the young person to do something that their parents might not allow them to do, like drive a vehicle or drink alcohol or smoke a cigarette or smoke marijuana or something like that. So typically they're going to treat the child as if they're older than they are. And so that gets them bound in this secrecy, right? And it's a bit of a test. So if they don't tell on their offender for allowing that to happen, there's less chance that they're going to report themselves later on. Because, of course, if they do report their abuse later on, they've also got to admit that they did all these things that they weren't supposed to do too. So So yeah, so an offender will choose a target. He'll put himself into situations where there is access to young people, slightly before their age of preference, so they have that time to establish the relationship. And then they will, allow them special privileges, like I said. And then they're going to start to somehow, then they're going to work to the the relationship will progress to touch, and it will be non-sexual at first typically. So roughhousing, like I said, or in younger children, it would be typical tickling and stuff like that. Maybe even getting the two boys to wrestle and he'll coach them or something like that. Maybe teach them how to use weapons, that kind of thing. Um, Sometimes offenders will ask the children what they know about sex and then sort of get their interest built up that way, offer to teach them. Offenders will often offer to teach young boys about masturbation. So um, this is the thing that I like to advocate to parents. We have to be the first person to educate our children on any matters sexual, because if an offender is the first one to introduce that subject to their potential victim, the victim may be feeling like entitled or deprived, that kind of thing. So they might be resentful that their parents wouldn't have allowed them to do this. And the offender will often use pornography, that might show other children engaging in these acts with children with children or children with adults, so that it lowers their inhibitions. So somehow they're lowering their inhibitions, and then they're maybe showing them graphic images so that it actually gets them excited. They may offer to teach them how to engage in these sexual acts, that kind of thing. They're going to normalize it. They're going to say things like, this is what everybody does, this is what you do when you get older. Other people might not understand. Whatever they need to say to entice the child, they will say. Sometimes they'll use religion, right, and shame them. We shouldn't have did this, you've sinned now, kind of thing. Now you can't tell anybody, or you just need to repent, that kind of thing. Or they'll use, like I said, their body's response as blackmail against them and say, oh look, your body responded, you must have enjoyed it, this was consensual, kind of thing. So at the end of the process, the offender's primary goal is to leave his victim very confused about whether or not they were willing participants. So that's sort of the grooming process. And it is also one of the other reasons why a lot of victims don't come forward, because they go, well, prior to the abuse, I really liked my offender, so was it really abuse?
Yeah. And I'm sure that's probably a very difficult thing for well, I know, for children to cope with. And one of the things that you've mentioned a few times is like types of offenders. Are there different types of offenders that people should be aware of? I guess
Um,
is the question I want to ask here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm aware of them being categorized in two different ways. Like I said, I don't necessarily specialize in sex offenders, but that we know that there's situational or opportunistic offenders, which they will offend against anybody, either sex, anytime an opportunity arises. And the ones that are more prolific and sort of predatory would be the preferential child molesters. So preferentials will use the grooming techniques that I just discussed, that they will hunt and recruit and groom their victims. So they a situational will take any opportunity, a preferential will create the opportunity. So these are the ones that have the highest number of victims.
So one of the things, and I always want to be cautious to, for lack of a better term, scare the shit out of people. And
Mm.
so I want to create context here for what can people be doing to be aware of those individuals in their
Mhm.
families, their neighborhoods, their communities, their
Mhm.
schools, their churches, and
Yeah.
then if they find that this is happening, what do they do about it?
Well, I think honestly, the best thing that people can do is educate themselves about the grooming techniques, right? And kind of be watching for them, right? So if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. I mean, let's be honest, we're all selfish people, right? We don't typically give things away for free, and certainly not for long periods of time, right? Like I might do a free couple free sessions with somebody, but I'm not going to do it for 10 years or whatever, right? And also, just paying attention to their own guts. If their guts tell them that something's wrong, chances are there is something wrong. In young children, they might say, I don't like that person, or I don't want to be alone with that person, or I don't want you to go to work, mommy, that kind of thing. So if young children are saying that, adults need to pay attention as to, ask a few more probing questions. Why, honey? Why don't you like that person? Or what games do you play that you don't like? Kind of thing. Rather than just saying, you need to get along with Johnny or whatever, right? And, yeah, that kind of thing. In older teens, and I would say, or school age children, I would say, it could be the child that's being bullied at school, right? Because sometimes children who are abused turn into the odd kid because they're so dysregulated, or they lack boundaries, that kind of thing, or they can't pay attention in class because they haven't slept in days because they're having nightmares at night, or maybe being abused at night, that kind of thing. So just watch out for these kids that kind of stand outside the crowd, the one that's being picked on, or maybe even the school bully, the class clown, like, could be victimized, right? Because oftentimes when children are falling behind for whatever reason, they will use humor to deflect from those facts and stuff. So yeah, I'm watching out for things like that. Like in older kids, I would say watch out for drastic changes in behavior. So if like in my book, I taught there's a boy who said, like, I used to go to church with grandma all the time, and then all of a sudden he's got really dark interests in, like, drugs, alcohol, pornography, dark poetry, heavy music, right? Drastic changes. So kids with a chip on their shoulder, like perpetually angry, sudden changes in their desire to be in a relationship with you, and just be careful not to chalk things like that up as, like, oh, he's just turning into a teenager, because yes, they will go through changes, but they're not typically sudden and extreme. So watching out for things like that.
Yeah, I think that's really practical too, because I'm like, as you're saying this in real time, I'm going back like, yep, check that box, that
Yeah,
box, that box, that box, that box.
right.
All these experiences that I had that should have what I would consider to be like signs for a cause of,
Yeah,
seeking deeper information, asking for help,
yeah.
things of that nature that were outrightly ignored. Now, I will say this, I believe, I hope to believe that we live in a bit of a different world than we did in the 80s, but I still want to always try to inform people about what to look out for. One
Hmm.
of the things, as we kind of switch gears here, I'm very curious about, so with working and studying and understanding so many of these experiences for men, talk to me about kind of what that journey is for men to actually first come, for lack of a better term, because I don't know how to phrase it, like bring it to light. And
Hmm.
I'd love for you to talk about the experience of that and how men can find support, or if you're someone who knows a man who's had one of these experiences, how you can
Hmm.
help support them.
Well, there are different agencies in the United States and Canada that support male survivors specifically. And I do think starting there is a nice reference point, because a lot of them will have links to psychologists or therapists who say that they specialize in male survivor issues. So I think that's important to, and I always advocate to psychologists, like, if you want to work in this area, advertise that you do, because for me, that's huge. Like, I get male survivors contacting me because of my areas of expertise. And I think, yeah, and what can we do in society to help men be more prepared? We need to talk about this. We need to make it safe for boys and men to come forward, right? We need to normalize this for boys and men who have felt that they're not allowed to come forward in the past. We need to, let them know that we believe you, we will hear you, we will listen, we will not mock you, we will not shame you for having been a victim when you were a little boy, right? Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just like educating people, educating parents, educating spouses about, symptoms, signs, that kind of thing. Just making it safe to have these deep discussions.
And in creating that safety, when somebody, I think one of the biggest struggles that I had personally was just getting that place of recognizing, like, there's not an aloneness to it, right? You go look at
Absolutely.
statistics. I mean, you see some statistics of 1 in 5, 1 in 6.
Hmm.
I would argue it's probably higher.
Yep, me
um
too.
is there anything that you have seen to feel congruent across the people, that the men you've been able to work with, that are signs that, or I guess tools, I would say, that one could use in the healing journey to start progressing forward?
Signs that they could use.
In any kind of signs or tools or resources, like when they are going through this process.
Well, I do recommend finding a trained trauma therapist, right? Because, I mean, when you're talking about sexual abuse, we're talking about, like, like traumatic experiences. So I do recommend, finding somebody that is trained in this. And, if you are in a community where there isn't somebody listed that's trained in this, get them to read my book, for example, like make them educate themselves. If you're going to work with me, I need you to know about these types of issues, right? So, and my book is designed to support male survivors, to validate their realities, to help them make sense of what they went through. That's the biggest feedback I get, is that your book helped me make sense of what I already went through. um, Michael, I'm curious about your own experience though. Like, one of the reasons that a lot of the men said that, in my research, said that they didn't come forward was because they kind of tested the waters a little bit to see if it was safe, and it hadn't felt safe. I'm curious if that was your experience at all.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And,
Hmm.
being in that situation and sitting down and telling my mother this, and basically the rebuttal being, you can't do that because if you do, we're going to lose these things. And
Wow.
us growing up in homelessness, us growing up in massive poverty. I mean, the majority of our food came from the church, clothes
Wow.
came from the Goodwill,
Hmm.
our electricity, our rent was often paid by
Wow.
tithes from the church. So,
Wow.
you're talking about this enmeshment into it in a way that was, if I were to do that, if I were to bring this to public knowledge, we'd be ostracized from the
Right.
very community that's
Wow.
keeping us afloat. And
Wow.
I think that's the thing that, when I came to realize that to be true, that's when I started going into these depths. And I could literally like paint this out step by step of going, suddenly I was more violent. Suddenly I was
Hmm.
bullying
Yeah.
kids.
Hmm.
I was not sleeping. Now,
Yeah.
I mean, there's tons of circumstances involved in that, but
Yeah.
ultimately it was I believe less so like fear of pain or punishment or anything like that, but more of the fear of like, if you don't do this, our family will
Yeah.
suffer,
What
right?
a burden to put on a child, right? I mean, you have to stay silent so that we can eat. But again, that is a very typical societal response to male abuse, is that, you're already in that role of protecting and providing for the family somehow. It was very common in my research that they didn't talk about it because it would either blow up the family, or mom would be with dad would go to jail, and who's going to support the family? And, or, dad's reputation in the community, he's a pastor, right? We just can't have this happen in our house. But yours sounds very extreme, that, you have to stay quiet because that's our food, literally.
Yeah, and it
Wow.
was, and the thing that I've come to discover in this, it was not until I was in a men's group therapy where I
Mm,
shared this, where I really started to be able to progress forward.
right.
And, looking at and understanding the narrative in society, and even being one of the few men publicly talking about something like this, I know that far more people are impacted by it.
Yeah,
And that
absolutely.
was a big reason why I wanted to have you come on and share not only your expertise, but the experiences of these men, is because I
Hmm.
recognize and see
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
it's so
Hmm.
detrimental.
Hmm.
And you see the impact of it in relationships, and mental, emotional, sexual, physical aspects of what it is to be you.
Yeah.
And as I've been in this process of healing, and I think it'll always be a part of it, like getting closer and deeper into understanding who I am,
Yeah.
there's always kind of looking at the causation and correlation of my behaviors that
Hmm.
that I can
Hmm.
tie to those moments and go, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense
Yeah.
because of that experience back then. And then now reframing it and being able to ultimately take control over the narrative. Do you find that with the men that you work with, that holds true for them as well?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of things that can happen. Like you just described, like, I mean, I suspect part of your experience was maybe even initially not knowing, the full impact of the abuse, right? Like, when you're a little boy, something bad has happened and you didn't like it, but as you turn into your teenage and adolescence and teenage years, you start to understand it more as sexual abuse, and your sexual identity is called to question. So I mean, that's also a big reason why a lot of boys and men stay silent too, is because, initially they don't understand it, they don't understand the impact of it, and then when they do start to understand the impact of it, they don't want to be labeled, they don't want to, they're already feeling alone enough, like, why did he pick me, why did this happen? And then, now I've got a circle of friends, the last thing I want to do is out myself as a victim when everybody else is talking about all the escapades and adventures they're on. Here I am, like, struggling to, discuss what I went through. So yeah, I think it's really common too that, yeah, like what you said, you went into a group and wind up getting support and then coming forward.
Yeah. And that was very much the case. And you know, you think about it, I basically just stuffed it down, right? I said, "Oh, this
Mhm.
is just who I am. It's fine, not a big deal." And
Mhm.
then what happens is you recognize like, "Oh, holy
Yeah.
shit, this is destroying all of my life." And it
Yeah.
wasn't just that one
Every
instance, but all of
yeah,
the traumatic experiences that I've had.
absolutely.
But I think that one of the things that I struggled with the most was just pointing to what you just said. It felt like there was going to be so much shame and guilt and judgment along
Mhm,
with
mhm.
telling the truth about it, because
Yeah.
that's what I'd been groomed into
Mhm.
experiencing.
Yeah. Well, possibly no one would. I mean, your mom sounds like she did believe you, but she told you had to stay quiet. Other times, boys are told like that. I'm sure that didn't happen, or like just like why are you making up lies, that kind of thing. I mean, I would like to think in today's day and age that is not more anywhere near as common as it may have been in the past, simply because of ignorance. People didn't understand that boys and men could be abused. But well, the other thing that reminded me, you asked me like what are some of the reasons why men don't come forward. Memory loss, like these, like you said, I minimized it in my own mind. Well, I've had a few of my participants worked really, 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 really hard to pretend that it didn't happen. Some of them, through the use of alcohol, actually managed to block the memories of their own abuse for years.
Yeah. And I have friends and even people that I have coached over the years that when they stepped into sobriety, like that came back. Right.
Yeah.
And that's one of the first things I always advise anyone when they're stepping into this healing journey is like get sober, because even though it sucks, you're going to discover things that you're going to be able to acknowledge that will become in turn the very things that are going to set you free from what's holding you
Yeah,
back right
absolutely. I love that word freedom, right? Like, I mean, that's sort of the goal that I wanted to help men in their books. Like, or maybe I should save that for the end. You told me what you're going to ask for the end, but like, I like to think of helping men like be transformed, right? Into what held them back and to the life that God created them to have, kind of thing, right?
now.
Helping them to reach their full potential.
I would love for you to give some practical tools here for people listening right now, especially geared towards the men listening right now who are like,
Yeah.
great, I hear this, I got it. Like
Mhm,
I feel like this has been a part of my experience,
mhm,
but like,
mhm,
all right, I'll go to therapy, I'll do the things, but
mhm.
is there more? Is there anything else that I can be doing that I could apply to my life, maybe even right now, that I can start to move forward around?
Well, I mean, I suggest starting with therapy, starting with group, getting the support you need, doing the reading that's out there. My book is one of those examples. There's other books as well. Getting the support, getting the help that you need, and then, being open about it, right? Because shame hides in the dark and victims don't have anything to be ashamed about. It's the offender that needs to be ashamed.
Yeah, I love that you said that, and you're so spot on, because you know what I recognized at one point was like, oh shit, this isn't actually my fault. And I
Mhm.
think that's probably going back to that word free that I used. That was one of the
Yeah.
most freeing moments of my life, because I recognized the truth about not having to be culpable, right? And I think that one of the things people suffer through is this idea that it is their responsibility, their thought.
Yeah.
Well, one of the questions I'm really curious about here, and I love the title of your book, Men Too,
Mhm.
Unspoken Truths. What other unspoken truths have we not touched base on that you think are incredibly important to this conversation?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean that was the whole basis of my research was, why are men not coming forward? So there's lots and lots of reasons, like, guilt, shame, fear, um uh just I mean, okay, so yeah, here's one that, people used to believe, and I don't know, I think it's still fairly common, that if you were victimized, there's a chance you're going to become an offender. In fact, a strong chance. Well, that's a lie, right? Like, research shows that less than 10% of victims will go on to become offenders. However, the lie is often perpetrated by offenders, because when they get caught, the first thing that they say, I was victimized. Please have sympathy for me. Please, I know what this boy went through because I went through it too. Well, there's research that shows that, um, m- what was it? That 70% of sex offenders, like, psychopathic sex offenders, would say that they were abused when they were a young boy themselves. Then, when you threaten them with a polygraph, that number drops to 30%, and that's without even doing the polygraph. Just threatening them with the polygraph, they self-disclosed, okay, it wasn't true, all the way down from 70 to 30%. So let's keep that in perspective. If we actually did the polygraph, which a lot of them would pass, unfortunately, But I don't believe those statistics are near what they're claiming. So that's one of the hidden truths, I think. That's not covered in my book, but that's it is one reason that a lot of boys and men keep quiet, because this lie, this myth that if you were abused, you're going to become an offender. You got to protect your children from them, right? And that's actually part of why a lot of men end up coming into therapy. When they get to the age where they're having their own children, they become afraid that they might be an offender. They might become an offender because, of course, they have to care for their own children, right? Their children's genitals are exposed to them, so they're terrified. Can I accidentally fall into this? No, you're not going to, right? But many men get so, they wind up with problems in their marriage because they refuse to help to care for their own children because they're so scared of this.
Wow, that's fascinating. And as someone who does not have children, I've
Mhm.
never thought about that before.
Yeah.
And if you're in that partnership, I can imagine how difficult it may be to
Mhm.
try to navigate that, not only as a
Yeah.
partner, but as a man trying to go through that and have those kind of thoughts. And
Mhm.
and to your point about, I've heard that so many times that people have abused because they were abused, and maybe it goes into that adage of hurt people. But I would hope that and clearly it's not the case for folks who are kind of wrapping their head around this for the first time. Are there any other like misnomers about male sexual abuse that maybe you could debunk or demystify for
Um,
us?
well, I think you already debunked a few of them for me. Like this idea that it was your fault, that you wanted it, that you invited it, that kind of thing, right? Like, like I said before, offenders will work really, 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 really hard to confuse their victims. So, and it works, right? Like, so, that myth that if they picked you, you must be gay, or you must have invited it, or you must have enjoyed it because your body responded that way, well, favorably to the abuse, like you got an erection or ejaculated. Spinal cord research shows us that even that they're two separate systems. The central nervous system is I can't explain it. I'm sorry, I'm not gonna do it justice, but the body can respond even when it's not a willing participant. Let's just leave it at that.
Yeah.
And that's true for women too. It's just not near as obvious in a woman, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean,
But
that's a really great point. Please go
yeah.
ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, and offenders get the opportunity to use it against a man because it's so obvious, whereas in a woman, it's not so obvious.
Yeah, and it's not, and I think that's one of the really interesting points about it is your body, it's autonomic, right? It's a part of the human system, and it immediately turns into this other place where, and I'm not a scientist either, so I won't dive into it, but there is research pointing to the fact, like, yeah, that's a part of the experience, unfortunately. And you hear many people have been molested and rape survivors speak to this, and
Mhm.
I think unfortunately it's just part of one of the reactions that the human body natively has under these circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, even in the sympathetic nervous system, a man can get an erection because there's lots of evidence that men who have gone to war when they're in the middle of combat will get an erection. So, that like this idea that you were a willing participant, and again, keep in mind, every child needs an attention. So if you did happen to like your offender, it's because he worked really, 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 really hard to make you like him. And when you started liking him, you had no idea that his intentions were not honest and honorable. So, that would be one thing I would say, like, don't blame yourself for being abused or for not having stopped the abuse sooner, right? Like, every child needs affection and attention. And if their abuser happens to be their primary source of that, it's very hard to stop that relationship.
Yeah. And it is, and especially as a child, because like the most unfortunate part of it is like you don't actually have control. And I think one of the things that I've experienced in my own self that's taken me a long time to heal from was like not beating myself up about not having the strength to deal with it. Right. And I think that when men can come together and when people can recognize as a whole, like, again, coming back to my point that children are not culpable for these things, then we start to see this massive shift, I believe. Now, of course, I'm
Absolutely.
not a scientist and I'm not a researcher, but I'm going to guess from my own personal experience that holds true.
Absolutely. Yeah. 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 You're absolutely right. I always tell my clients, don't judge yourself as if you knew then what you know now, or what you know now.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, it's so easy to do that. It's so easy to say, why was I so stupid? Why did I, well, if you actually go back to that, like, actually, I remember mom and dad were fighting a lot back then, and this guy was like, it was nice to get away from the house. Or in your case, maybe he took you out to fancy restaurants or gave you gifts that your mom could never afford to give you, right? Like, and of course, every child wants those things and deserves those things. But, like I say, that, I mean, it sounds to me like you would have been the perfect target for a pedophile because you had a lot of needs, and so did your mother.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why coming to the realization of A, not beating myself up, not being culpable for it, doing the work, healing, growing, changing, reading the book, showing up,
Mhm,
taking care
mhm.
of myself has dramatically changed
Yeah.
my life for the
Mm.
better. And
Yeah.
I think it's always a process. I try to teach people as often as possible, this is a forever process. Like
Yeah,
once you step into
absolutely.
this arena, because there will always be the next trigger, there will always be the next thing. But if you continue to show up and leverage the tools and make meaning of the experiences, and honestly, for me, what's probably been most important is trying to reassociate all the experiences of my life. Like on the backside of this, you can still have an amazing life, and you don't
Mhm,
even have to share it publicly. Like I realize, like me sharing this publicly is for some people probably the first time they're even bringing
yeah.
awareness to this kind of conversation.
Mhm.
And I don't think men or anyone for that matter need to share it, but I
No.
am saying that it is here, it does exist, and to go and share it within,
Mhm,
a safe space with
mhm,
therapists, with the
mhm,
right people, it
mhm,
will
mhm.
change your life
Absolutely,
forever.
absolutely. And I mean, I've heard I do agree that it's a lifelong journey. I think it probably would be for women, but it's maybe not as much of a struggle because women have so much support readily available. I mean, you can go into any city, and any sexual assault center is used to dealing with women, and most of them are well accustomed to dealing with men now, but that's only in the last 10, 15 years. So, I mean, and any woman can look anywhere for support, but a man has to be kind of careful because there's still a lot of people that don't understand that men can be victimized, and there's still a lot of people, like I say, that are still buying into those biases that have existed for a lifetime before. um, the other thing I just wanted to say, Michael, was like, you said like it's a lifetime process. Well, and obviously abuse happens in a lot of different contexts. So one of the things that I tried to do in my book was say, for example, if you were abused in a familial situation and you're now in a, if you went through what we call parentification, where you were made to be the parent to other, maybe even to your abuser, right? Like one of my research participants, his father put him in the role of being his mom's date, lover, everything. And, so he would benefit from reading these 5 books that I gave as listings in my book to read, right? Or, if you're struggling in your adult life with attachment issues because you don't trust, here's a good book to read. So that's one of the kind of things I tried to do in my book, was say, like, I'm not an expert in all of these areas, but here's the expert in that area you might want to go check out, and here's the expert in that area you might want to go check out. So there really are resources out there. It's just a matter of finding them.
Yeah, and I love that you included those resources because I've always tried to do the same thing. Because the one thing that I know is there's just so much information, there's experts
Yeah.
everywhere, and you do have to seek it. And I
You have
think
to,
that's one of the more difficult parts about it is people don't recognize the agency that they have to take
yeah.
in this process.
Well,
Um,
I mean, and you also have to be careful who you follow, right? Because, I mean, one of the things that I've learned as a psychologist is that anybody can call themselves a counselor, whether they got credentials to do it or not. Like I've had clients come in to see me, and it's like they tell me what they did with their last therapist, and I just shake my head, and then I go do research and find out what their last therapist training was, and there isn't any. So it's like it's really scary that, anybody can call themselves an expert. So, doing a little bit of homework and finding a few people that you trust and then taking their word on who they say is credible, kind of thing, might be helpful too. So, like I say, just being careful, and yeah, and finding those groups, those supports, those, listening to podcasts like yours, like you have different guests on that they get to hear, okay, this guy sounds credible, this guy's got the expertise in this area, I might research him a bit more.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that too, is because when I first found my therapist to deal with this specifically, I actually went to psychology.com,
Yeah.
created a spreadsheet,
Oh
and
wow.
called like
Yeah.
25 different therapists and
Good for
asked
you.
them all a series of questions
Good
that
for
were
you.
very pointed because I
Good.
needed to know and understand whether or not they knew more than me to help me with the thing I'm trying to unravel.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Yep.
So
Absolutely.
I recommend that tool. Kelly, my friend, this has been an amazing conversation. Before I ask you my last question, can you tell us a little bit more about the book and where people can find you?
Yeah, I mean it's Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, Chapters, Indigo, Walmart. It's available on a lot of venues now. My website is kellipalfy.com, and there's links to where you can buy my book there if you're interested. Yeah.
And of
Uh,
course, we'll put
sorry.
all the links in the show notes for the listeners. And I highly recommend that you check out the book. Again, it's called Men Too. It's the unspoken truths about male sexual abuse. Kelly, my friend, my last question for you. What does it mean to you to be unbroken?
Yeah, honestly, you know, I think that that word that I used earlier, that transformed, um, a lot of people that I've worked with have also turned to their faith, and you know, it's like going from a place of being able to, being broken and being feeling like unworthy, unloved, and transitioning into a place where you can now help other people heal the things that they have struggles with. And just, yeah, I think, this word transformation comes to my mind, where you can, reintegrate back into society and help others, if possible, with the things that you struggled with. And yeah, I think, like I said, I mean, I always tell my clients, I can help, he can heal. So I do, yeah, I do encourage people, just get the help that's out there. There is help.
Yeah.
Consider
There is.
accessing faith too.
Beautifully said, my friend. And thank you so much for being here.
My
Unbroken
pleasure.
Nation, thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, comment, share, tell a friend. And until next time, my friends, be unbroken. I'll see ya.